People who are depressed often feel embarrassed and worried about seeking the doctor's help for their problems. This is not unusual, says Dr. Jan Scott, a psychiatrist on Tyneside who specialises in treating people with depression.
I think the common things that you might want to say to me when you first came in the office is this a sign of personal weakness? This is a fear that many, many people have. The answer is no. You're not inadequate in any way. You may have very negative thoughts about yourself, but these are part and parcel of what depression does. Depression puts blinkers around you, and you start to think about things in a very negative way. But that doesn't mean that those thoughts are true. It means that that's one of the awful things that happens when your mood becomes very depressed. I suppose the second thing you often say is, am I going mad? And that's a very, very common fear that people have, that somehow you're going to continue down this rocky road until you're almost totally out of control. And the thing I always say to that is no. This is a very, very common disorder. You won't know from walking around the streets how many people get depression, but probably as many as 5% of the population may have this problem. But only 1 in 1,000 of the people who actually get depression actually require to go into hospital because of it. So there's only a small number who get a very, very severe form of depression. The likelihood is you'll be treated by your general practitioner, or you'll come up to the hospital and things will be sorted out. And that's the third fear that people have. Will I get better? This feels horrible. You begin to wonder if it can ever change again. You feel the future looks rather bleak. And the answer is yes. The evidence is that certainly you will probably respond to one of the 3 most common types of treatment. At least 70% of people get better with these sorts of treatments. If you don't, then there are units that offer specialist treatments as well. And our research evidence is that we can help most people to improve.
Whatever treatment your doctor recommends, there are things that you can do to help yourself to cope with your depression. Dr. Jan Scott now outlines some of these strategies. We suggest you play this part of the tape several times so that you're fully conversant with what's being suggested. Printed record sheets are enclosed with this pack for you to use, adapt or copy. They'll help you keep a record of your progress and are an important part of the self-help treatment. Remember, although these techniques, which are called cognitive therapy techniques, may sound strange to you at first, they really do work well for some depressed people and are recommended by many doctors and psychologists. It'll take time to get the hang of them, so don't be in too much of a hurry and don't feel a failure if they don't work overnight. Keep practicing them until you can do them effectively. You may need to adopt them as part of your lifestyle in the future, so that whenever you do feel depressed, you can be ready to take immediate steps to recovery. Dr. Jan Scott explains the first steps that you must take towards making cognitive therapy, or CT, techniques work.
The sorts of things you can do that can be very helpful are, in some ways, fairly simple and at the same time very useful. For example, you could start to keep a diary of how you're spending your time. This is very helpful because one of the things that happens if you're feeling depressed is people often don't feel like doing things, or they just don't realise how much they are still doing, even though they don't enjoy it as much as they used to. So you could keep a record on a simple piece of paper, the days of the week down one side of the page, and just keep an hourly record of how you're spending your time. At the end of the day, you can review what you've done, and first of all, you'll often be surprised by actually how much you have been doing, and just not perhaps enjoyed it as much as you used to. But you can also start to pick out the things that you did enjoy doing, and maybe see if you can start to plan days where you build in some activities that you do like to do, so that you can then start to plan the next day. And I think one of the things that you will find is that if you plan out the next day, sometimes it just makes it that much easier to carry on through the day. If you sit down at tea time the night before and write out a plan of how you're going to spend the next day, Lots and lots of people have said to me how helpful it is to structure their time when they're feeling depressed. That sometimes you get up in the morning and you don't feel very good and you can't get started on your activities, and all of a sudden several hours have gone by, and then you start to feel more depressed because you feel you haven't been doing things and you haven't achieved things. So if you can plan ahead a little bit, and also don't worry if you don't do everything that you've put on the timetable. This is an experiment. It's an attempt to gauge how much you can or can't do and what you can enjoy and perhaps what you don't enjoy so much. If you can do that experiment, you can start to see if you're trying to make yourself do too much, then you can adjust accordingly and try and plan a day that works better for you. In the longer term, hopefully you'll be able to plan several days ahead and build in activities of things that you need to do that may be basic, sometimes not necessarily particularly enjoyable things, but things that need to be done around the home or to do with work, as well as things that you're going to enjoy. And you can even start to rate your enjoyment of different things so that you can constantly build up a pattern of things that can be good fun to do. And that actually on its own can be very, very helpful. It's often helpful for you to go through the list of things you're trying to tackle and to prioritise them, either because some things are more important that you absolutely feel you really must try and get those done during the course of the day, or sometimes you can actually set up the list in terms of what are the things I can most likely undertake today and what are the things I will attempt if I feel up to it later on. So prioritising the list can be very helpful, particularly if you find from keeping your diary that you're one of these people who tries to plan too many things in the day. If you put too many things in and you don't do them, you might start to feel a bit as if you're a failure because you're feeling negative. It's much better to try and set a list that's realistic for what you're trying to do. And so if you can prioritise from the list and say, these are the things that are very important, and these are the things that are not so important, and then try and tackle them on that basis, I think you'll find that as time goes by, you become more and more active, you become more motivated to do things. You overcome the inertia that we know is part and parcel of feeling depressed. On the list, though, you'll probably also find some tasks that look a bit more complicated, and one of the reasons you maybe haven't been able to take them on so far is that it just seems like too big a thing to do. And what I would suggest is that maybe if you sit down and approach it a little bit like breaking it up into simple steps, that if you think about going on a train journey from Newcastle to London, then you have to go through several stations. You don't just suddenly arrive in London. You might have to stop at Durham and Darlington. And if you draw a little line and on each and make several points along the line, and then try and break down the task into manageable subunits so that each little task on its own is probably achievable, and you just do them one at a time. You may only do it one day at a time, one of these little units, but the crucial thing is you've broken down something that you thought was insurmountable into a task that's potentially achievable. And we often find that by doing that, people can actually get to their goal without the stress that they felt previously.
The second major part of the CT strategy concerns looking at your thoughts and actions and assessing them.
One of the classical things that happens when people are feeling depressed, and this is typical of virtually everybody we ever see in the clinic, and so if you feel like this, it's really important to know that everybody else gets this as well, is that you start to see the things around you in a rather negative way. I suppose a simple example of this would be that if you walk down the street of a shopping centre and you saw somebody you knew, and if you waved to them but they kept on walking. Now, many of us would have all sorts of explanations of this, but when people are feeling depressed, the classic thing they come and say is, they don't want to know me anymore, they've avoided me. This is a good example of what we call an automatic thought. And the reason we call them automatic is they just pop into your head. You don't do it on purpose, but at that moment in time you really believe the thought. Now the crucial thing about this is that actually if you believe that people maybe don't like you, not surprisingly, that can actually make you feel quite down. And people get into this vicious cycle where the more sad they feel, the more of these negative thoughts they have, and the more of the negative thoughts they have, the more sad they feel. And so one of the things that can be really helpful is to try and identify and write down some of these thoughts and put them under the microscope. So What's a useful technique here is to draw 3 columns on a piece of paper and to put situation at the top of one column, feelings at the top of the second one, and thoughts, or possibly thoughts and images at the top of the third, because sometimes people get a visual image rather than an immediate thought popping into their head. And if you write down the situation you were in at the time, how you felt, and try and identify what's going on inside your head. This is sort of like the self-talk. We often have little commentaries going on to ourselves about what's going on around us. And if you can record the idea, and then there are 3 vital things to do. First of all, have a look at the evidence to support the thought. So we put it under the microscope and say, what information have we got that supports the idea? What information have we got that goes against the idea? Secondly, are there any alternative ways of interpreting the situation you've been in? Because one of the things that constantly happens is that because this automatic thought pops into your head, first of all, then people often don't realise that it may not be the most accurate interpretation of what's going on around them. So write down all the alternative ways of interpreting the situation. And thirdly, have a think about what's the effect of this thought on you. How does it make you feel? Has it made you feel worse? Has it made you feel better? And what are the advantages and disadvantages of looking at situations in this way? The other 2 things you can then do, and this will take a bit of time. It's not easy to tap these automatic thoughts straight away, so don't worry if it seems quite difficult to begin with. But if you do start to manage to tap them, is you can start to see if challenging them actually makes you feel any better. Does this change how you feel in your mood? And finally, when you've got to what the most accurate interpretation of the situation is, can you actually think of ways to tackle it? What would help in the situation? If you're still not certain whether this friend is talking to you or not, would you have the courage to ring them up and maybe just have a chat and see if you could arrange a cup of coffee or something? Could you get any more evidence as to what was going on? It's very important not to let these things go by without at least looking at the evidence. Often we take information as fact when in fact it's just an idea that's going through our head at that moment in time. And it's very important in depression to keep looking at these thoughts because, as we say, one of the classic symptoms of depression is you feel more negative about things and you see things in a more negative way. It's like going around with a pair of blinkers on and you jump to all sorts of conclusions which aren't necessarily always the way things are. And it's really important to try to learn how to get out of that way of thinking so that hopefully your mood can improve gradually with time.
As we said earlier, these techniques can take time to learn, and often people trying them for the first time find them just too difficult. Dr. Scott's message is, persist.
I think it's often the case that people find it quite difficult to begin to set up their own timetables, keep diaries, and record their thoughts. And it's interesting because one of the experiments we often do is to try and get people who aren't depressed to carry out these tasks, and they find it difficult. And I can remember the first time I tried to write down my automatic thoughts, it took me weeks to fill in the columns. So if you keep trying, I think you'll gradually find that you can do these techniques with greater ease, to the point that you don't even really have to think about them too much eventually. Secondly, remember that when people are feeling depressed, they often don't concentrate as well. So you may need to go back and play bits of the tape several times to get to the bottom of what you're trying to do and why it might be helpful. And thirdly, there are some books around that can be quite helpful on this sort of approach, and some of them actually use these particular techniques. Different techniques work better for different people. So some people might find it really helpful to use a diary, but you may prefer to write down thoughts. And that's fine. Whichever technique is helpful to you is the one to plug away at. And you may even find that if it's hard to do to begin with, you may have somebody around, a friend or somebody from the family, who could even help you do some of the records or set up a diary. It's quite interesting to get other people involved because they can often recognise things about what's happening that maybe you even can't at certain points. it's very interesting that some of these techniques seem very simple, and we wonder why something so simple could be helpful. But I think, for example, there's lots of information that says simply being able to start to structure your time when you feel depressed has lots of benefits. It makes people feel more in control of what's happening to them. It'll make you perhaps feel that you can enjoy life more, or that you've achieved more. And it can sometimes just help in that first step of overcoming your inertia when you're feeling really flat. And there's lots of research evidence now that these techniques used in a slightly more detailed way in outpatient clinics can actually be effective in as many people as respond to drug treatments.